Abby Hamilton wrote this, and she did do quite a good job with this one. It's a solid article, and it's going to give you it'll give you a decent idea of what was discussed. Um, I don't know if they attribute something to me that I don't know how powerful it is, or I don't really know or care. It's mentioned that it's, something about stuck out to Jess Gelter, and that's fine. I'd rather actually have Jess on here at some point. We did do an interview recently, but just quickly outside of Sharon Arts, so you can, I've said it on the stream before, but definitely go check that out because there's a bunch of really good information in there. But it would also probably be super positive to just have another conversation with her, and I know that she's in large part leading that discussion, and it might make sense to have Roy Schlieben on for that conversation as well, or maybe we do another interview segment that's more conversational and broad form. I'll figure it out, but at any rate, the main thing is the way it was broken apart. The article states this, but about half the room, because I was there, about half the room went and backed up the idea of somehow the makerspace, like Max Makerspace, would be incorporating Sharon Arts into their pre-existing infrastructure, like their nonprofit model. And the other half kind of didn't seem as into that, and they wanted to try and figure out other solutions. After everybody kind of reconvened, it seemed like the groups that were interested in how, in integrating the Max were sort of trying to think about, all right, well, what are ways that we can just start doing stuff? You know what I mean? How do we make this sustainable? What type of program should we run? Any grant writing. There were several people there that were familiar with writing grants and stuff like that. So that was sort of just the track that they went on, was, all right, how can we do this? Exactly what is the legal standing of Sharon Arts as a name and as an organization, and their space, because obviously a lot of those things need to get worked out. I think that was one of Roy's contributions to the conversation, was he needed to sort of see what was up with the old Sharon Arts Center. So at any rate, yeah, that was just a general go of just sort of trying to figure out nuts and bolts of the situation. And the other groups were trying to sort of think of, look at other spaces, see what they've done, what works for them. There was a lot of debate about just the viability of Sharon Arts as an organization historically. A lot of people were talking about how it hadn't been doing well for a really long time. That, the move to get the gallery in Peterborough was somehow an attempt to keep the business alive, because it was, I don't know much about that in terms of its how true that is, or I don't know a whole lot of the details on that one. But I feel like when I was younger, I remember hearing something like that. Having grown up around a bunch of artists in town, and I seem to remember that always kind of being in the background, oh, how are we going to keep it going? And that this wasn't the first time that they'd run into problems. And I mean, an NHIA was another move to preserve it in a lot of ways. So, it was sort of well, do we want to keep the name? Yeah, we want to keep the name. We really like the name Sharon Arts. Okay, well, do we want to keep the building? Well, I don't know. Is the building in Sharon too far? Do we want something that's better for the students locally? Like, so it raised a number of questions. I think the main thing is to not get too bogged down in the history of things and to remember that what what's bringing everybody to that conversation is not I mean, maybe it is for some people, but it's certainly not just the idea of like of this particular organization or this institution. Like that's not what it is. It's about what it does for the community as a whole, and I mean like regional community, not Peterborough community, not Sharon community, like Monadnock community and beyond. There are people that have come from all over to work with and in Sharon Arts. So it's important to acknowledge that that's what people care about is the institution that facilitates this artistic creation and provides. Yeah, I mean, it facilitates. They have the resources and the tools and the infrastructure to allow it to happen. That's like been a huge part of our town and community and region, and that's something we're known for. So everybody that showed up seemed really committed to that. And I think as long as the folks that are involved maintain that that's the core vision, that's the thing that everybody in the room agreed on. Like everybody, if that's the core, then the most important thing that I would suggest to folks going down the line is like, be ready to sacrifice certain things for the general cause of making sure that we still have this. Now, I'm not saying that we shouldn't use Sharon Arts anymore, but something I had said that evening was like, Sharon Arts Center is just 3 words, right? So it's not like you can put those words on virtually anything, much the way they had done so when they moved. They added a location in downtown Peterborough, and that was sort of like their storefront, right? They put Sharon Arts Center on the front of it. That's the same name as was out on the Sharon facility. So the idea that like the branding is not mutually reliant on the physical property, regardless of what, like, that has to do with the permissions used. So as like, and then the other thing was sort of like, well, what makes the most sense for the space? What makes sense economically? Something that came up at that meeting and has come up repeatedly is the IDG building, just down the road from Shaw's on 101, which has been sitting there vacant for a really long time. Let's see. I actually have some numbers on this. Let me see here. So I think, let's see. I think the original number that I had heard for IDG was somewhere in the like 1.5, 2 million range. Might have been less than that. At any rate, I mean, according to my notes here, I mean, NHIA was trying to sell the Sharon facility for 1.2 million. That was 7,000 square feet of space. So that's a pretty big facility. But it's the question sort of becomes like, look, like, I mean, currently broadcasting from the makerspace, I would personally advise that, and again, this is my like opinion, man, but I personally would advise to not move a full arts facility in here, just because I don't know that, like, I wouldn't want to see that be too much for the makerspace to process at this particular time. I know that they're doing a lot of other expansive things that are really positive right now, and it I see the value in an additional secondary space with specific designations for this. Now, what I will say is that the makerspace has just added figure drawing classes, which, like, attend that. My partner here, Sarah, has actually organized those classes, so that's just, again, something to try and get going again. A service that Sharon Arts Center would have provided, and is not currently, because they're not. Um, and it's important to have those classes. I think that's a really positive thing. But as far as, like, okay, we're gonna get kilns and we're gonna move kilns into space, and, like, there's a lot of physical logistics. Those are really heavy things. There's certain space allocations here at the makerspace right now for certain people, like, the robotics team and the welding studio and the wood shop, and there's a lot that goes into that, and they're working on getting additional space. So it's a process, but in a lot of ways it might make sense to take that cue and look at a space like the IDG building or whatever. But the idea is to not isolate the thinking around what can and should be done. It's not like, oh, well, if the makerspace is taking over Sharon Arts, then suddenly we're just trying to cram all of Sharon Arts in the mix. Like, no, we're not necessarily saying that. Everything is open to everything else. We can figure this out. But one main thing was getting all that nitty gritty stuff figured out on what the status, like, the real status of the actual property, how long that lot in Sharon can go unused before it stops being available for educational purposes, pushes it back into residential. Looks like I might have just lost a little bit of time there, but doesn't look like too much. Sorry for the glitch, anybody. Anywho, I will try and come back to this with some further updates on, like, the details of what the plan is, and hopefully get that directly from the mouths of the people that are doing the organizing behind that.